Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Yasin wal Quran al Hakim. Innaka laminal mursalin ala siratim mustaqim. تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون. Yasin. These letters are one of the miracles of the Quran, and none but Allah knows their meaning. By the Quran full of wisdom, truly you are one of the messengers, on the straight path, sent down by the Almighty, the Most Merciful, in order that you may warn a people whose forefathers were not warned, so they are heedless. Indeed, the word of punishment has proved true against most of them, so they will not believe. Verily, we have put on their necks iron collars reaching to their chins, so their necks are raised up. And we have put a barrier before them and a barrier behind them, and we have covered them up so they cannot see. It is the same to them whether you warn them or warn them not, they will not believe. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad.
जिस पर जतन किसी से तवल्ला न चाहिए गैर खुदा किसी का भरोसा गैर खुदा किसी का भरोसा न चाहिए एक दर पे बैठ गए तवक्कल करीम पर अल्लाह के फकीर को फेरा अल्लाह के फकीर को फेरा न चाहिए सुगरा ने शाहिदी को लिखा खत भेजिए घर चाहते नहीं हमें अच्छा न चाहिए दो बेटियां तो पास हो एक जाबल बहन मैं सच कहूँ कि आपको बाबा मैं सच कहूँ कि आपको बाबा न चाहिए कहती थी फिजा शाह में बाजारियों हटो आले रसूल पर सिताब ऐसा न चाहिए ये कौन बीबियां हैं तुम्हें कुछ खबर नहीं ज़हरा की बेटियों का ज़हरा की बेटियों का तमाशा न चाहिए जिंदा में मुक़य्यद हुए जिस दाम हराम शाह अम्बो खलाइक हुआ दरवाजे पे नागा बलवा हुआ इस दर्जे के मसदूद हीरा सर शर्म से जंजीर बा आबिद ने तावो अरक़े शर्म असीरों के बदन में रोता दारे गज़ो हमेशा है नागा नमूदार हुई शाम गरीबा आया गज़बालो वहाँ शिमरे बदीमा एक से मुखातिब हुआ वो दुश्मन यज़दा अब जाओगे ओदाए मुखाफिल दरे कोई गिरहाई ना कभी आले अबा की कल देखियो बे ये सुन के परेशान हुआ अम्बो वो सारा गुम हो गया एक शख्स का फर्जंद खजारा चिल्लाया पिदर उसका रहा दिल पना यारा फर्जंद भी बाबा उसे कह के पुकारा वो तिफ्ल लिपटने जो लगा के पिदर से पैदा होएगा सकीना के जिगर से भर के दमे सर्द ये की बानों से गुफ्तार इस बच्चे को तो देखो के क्या खुश है ये दिलदार क्या नाम पिदर प्यार से लेता है हर एक बार एक हमें बिन बाप ये दिल में जो मेरे दर्द है खालिक पे आया है मैं किसको कहूँ मेरा बाप कहाँ है बाबा मेरे होते तो उन्हें कहती मैं बाबा अब बाप कहाँ जिसको कहूँ बाप मैं दुखिया यूं कोई पिदर बेटी से गाफिल नहीं होता हैरान बाबा के वो अशफाक हुए क्या आदा ने हमें खैर किया शाम मिला कर बाबा मेरे क्यों मुझको सकीना पे जो रेखा तुई तारी बस हाय पिदर कह के कई बार पुकारी तड़पी जो ज़मीं पर तो ज़मीं हिल गई सारे जिंजला के गाश जबर ने अब खूब रुलाऊंगा तुझे मैं ना डरूंगा रे तुझको तुझको जीरो दे
जुदा कैद करूंगा
फिर शिमर ने बाजुए सकीना को जो पकड़ा कुनबे की तरफ उसने अजब याद से देखा सब कैदियों में एक कयामत हुई बर्बाद सजा के कदमों पर मचल कर गिरे यो लेपटी थी बाई से वो इस खौफो खतर में एक हाथ तो गर्दन में था
एक हाथ कमर में
मुंह दे के सजाद का कहती थी वो डर कर अब आप मेरे रोने के जामिन हो बरादर घर तुमसे छुट्टी जी मेरी होएगी क्यों गए अब रो तो जो जाए करे शिमरे भैया मुझे तो शिमर से इस वक्त बचा ले अब रो तो कर दीजिए जालिम गे अब रोई सो मैं रोई नब रोंगी जिन्हार अब रो अगर बाप को अपने तो गुनहगार फरमाओ के अब छोड़ दे मुझको ये जफाकार बाजो मेरा दुखने लगा ऐ आबिद किस तरह जुदा कुनबे से होएगी सकीना तुम कह दो कसम का के न रोएगी
सकीना
ये कहती थी खेचा जो सितम गने खजारा कुर्ता तो पटा था वो पटा और भी सारा तब आबिद बीमार ने रो कर ये पुकारा ऐ शिमर ये बिन बाके बेटी है गाफिल तेरी दहशत से न होएगी सकीना अब ऐसा डरे न रोएगी सकीना अब ऐसा डरी है कि न रोएगी सकीना
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتحدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الحمم ولا يناله غوص الفطن ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم وآل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين صاحب العصر والزمان خليفة الرحمن إمام الإنس والجان ولعن الله أعداهم أجمعين إلى يوم الدين أما بعد فقد قال الله وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا قوا أنفسكم وأهليكم نارا صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات على محمد وآل Muhammad. It is once again an honor and a privilege for me to be with the City of Knowledge community out in Dallas, Texas. Inshallah, all of you are doing well. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect all of you from this coronavirus, and any of your family members or community members or anyone you may know that has been afflicted by this virus, may Allah grant them shifa. Either you are an equal in humanity or you are a brother or sister in faith. We have reached the midpoint of the month of Safar, and with that comes the shahadat of Bibi Sakina, the beautiful young daughter of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam. And inshallah, in the Masaib today and tomorrow, I'll dedicate the musibah to her and to her alone. And it's important that we give her that respect. And in trying to think of a topic on what to talk about this weekend, last weekend with all of you, I spoke about the issues of the youth and some of the problems that they face, and a little bit of a reality check for a lot of them. Today, given the fact that we are here to commemorate the daughter of Imam Hussein, I thought it would be a good idea to speak a little bit about the family unit this weekend. And let me give you a little bit of premise and a little bit of introduction why I chose this topic. And obviously, one of the biggest issues facing our communities across the page are family domestic issues. Our divorce rates are up. Our parents are more and more confused. The society now is becoming more difficult to raise good, pious, God-fearing kids inside of the society. On top of that, trying to fight, this virus and trying to uphold this economy inside of your home, and all these things are there. So it becomes a challenge to strengthen the family unit. But it's important that even through the lens of Karbala that we continue to fight to ensure that we are part of and we are raising God-centric family members. We talk about Imam Hussein's mission and, what he did and why he did it, and a lot has been discussed about that. But in light of what I want to speak about this weekend, if you look at who surrounded him and who were the ones that were standing right beside him in this entire difficult mission, it was his family. Of course, the Ashab were there, but his family, be it his sons or be it his daughters or be it his wife or be it his sister, his nephews, all of them. So it's one thing where you yourself are able to live a God-centric life. It's one thing where you're not able to export that taqwa onto everybody else around you. And in light of the fact that we are here to commemorate that 4-year-old daughter, very difficult to and I don't know how many of you, I have a 6-year-old daughter at home. And I shudder to think how she would handle it. And one can say, oh, this is the daughter of a ma'soom. It's not that simple. A 4-year-old is bilakhir a 4-year-old. And the poise sometimes, and the strength, and the courage. And yes, there were moments where she showed the signs of her being 4 in terms of her gut-wrenching words to Imam Hussein, her plea that why can't we go back home? All those things are there, but the fact that Imam Hussein was able to bring his family and then they're able to give the sacrifices that they gave is a lesson for you and I. That if we have a family now to lead, especially as men inside the homes, the husbands and the fathers, then we have to lead that family the same way we want to get to God, with to take them with us towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I've seen too many times that the husbands now take off on their wife and their children towards Allah. They go to this Hajj, they go to that Ziyarat, but they never take their family. And in the process, what you're doing is you are distancing yourself spiritually from those individuals who really should be your core group. So we'll look at 2 different discussions in this weekend. Tonight, I want to look at the concept and the idea of marriage. And I'm going to start a little bit about the idea of spouse selection, when to get married, ideally, the idea of getting married young, for example. Right? Those issues and those factors, a lot of my parents out there They begin to think about these things when the child reaches about 16, 17 years old. Kind of get a feel for who's in the community, and maybe have a sort of a list in your mind of a potential individual, what he or she should look like and how they should be. And then tomorrow I want to speak about parents and the importance of parents and the importance of respecting parents and what role they play. And I'll give you, all through I'll give you my personal experiences, my little anecdotes as you guys are accustomed to. But hopefully in the process, in these 2 nights, albeit it's not enough, you need an entire usher to talk about the family. These 2 aspects are of utter importance. So the first thing I'm going to talk about tonight is this idea that, do we truly understand why Islam promotes the idea of marriage? Albeit on paper, it's not a wajib act. It's not wajib for anyone to get married. But eventually it can, and usually it does become wajib on individuals who have now entered the world of sin. But more importantly than simply saving yourself in terms of sin, there's a deeper need we have at the fitri, at the innate level that we need to fulfill. And before I get into the more practical discussions, let's understand the overall concept. What is it that marriage is fulfilling? Because in this society, really globally, when you look at these little passive-aggressive comments sometimes you hear in TV shows, or referring to the wife and the kids as the ball and chain, for example, live your life and then get married. It really presents this idea that your life is over, your freedom is over, the fun is over once you get married, all becomes serious. And of course that's not the case. Islam says your life begins really when you get married. I try to think to myself personally what I was doing before I got married, how I spent my time, what did I accomplish, and then I think about life before we had kids, my wife and I. We oftentimes talk about this. What do we do with our day? And so, naturally the idea that the ball and chain and life is over and all these things, of course, are nothing but propaganda. The reality is that we have something called the Fitrat inside of us, which is called the innate disposition of the human being. What that means basically is that we all have innate needs inside of us. Okay, absolute truths that we understand. That is absolute across all the human beings. This is not about Islam or being Shia or whatever the case may be. You have existence as a human being. Then you have this thing called the Fitrat. For example, there are things that a 7-year-old knows that's wrong and that's right without going to school, without understanding God. All these things are inside of them. They're innate. They're fitriya, as you say in Urdu. Falan cheez fitriya, it's kind of inside, right? So for example, the example that oftentimes is used in the book, and that I use all the time, is the love that a mother has for a child. You don't learn these things, right? You don't need to go to a class for a professor to tell you to love your child. It doesn't work like that, right? Those things are already innate. Now, how to love your child and how to discipline them, how to raise them, that of course, you can learn and teach and kind of, bounce ideas off each other. But the innate love is just that, it's innate. There are many things inside of our fitrat that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed inside of us that needs to be fulfilled in the external world. So I'll give you a couple of simple examples, then we'll build up to my topic. The first example is food, right? We are individuals who are innately hungry. Right? No one is teaching us to be hungry. We haven't gone to classes. Say, okay, this is how you become hungry. Yes, there's a ton of stuff out there on what to eat, how to eat, meal planning, calorie counting, intermittent fasting, this grams of fat and this amount of protein. All that stuff, of course, is there. That's fulfilling the hunger. That's not recognizing the hunger. The hunger is already recognized. Thirst is the same way. Thirst is innately. We feel thirsty. Okay. Now, in terms of how much water to drink and avoiding certain drinks and all that, of course, is there. But again, that's a fulfillment that's the quenching of the thirst, not so much the existence of the thirst. Okay. Let's go one notch higher. Justice, innate need of every single human being. Right. The moment that we see injustice done on anybody, it pinches us for a while. Now, others, elect to go, out in the streets and protest or speak up or post something on their social media. But at least the bare minimum is the heart of our hearts now bleeds a little bit when we see how much oppression is happening right now in the world. Okay? And The other one that I want to speak about today a little bit is the need for companionship. That's also innate inside of us. It is innate inside of us. We don't need to be taught that we need to surround ourselves with social individuals, or we ourselves need to be social. Now, mind you, there might be moments and days where you want to be left alone. I want a little bit of my time, and I want a little bit of free time, and I just close my door and lock it, and nobody bother me, and that's perfectly normal. But that doesn't usually last very long. And usually those individuals who elect to live in a basement by themselves with the lights off and draw the curtains are somebody who doesn't have a sound mind, and that really needs to be treated. Otherwise, as the Prophet says, we are social beings. And we are driven by this fitri need to always be around people. Okay? Now, the overall ruling of the fitrat is that because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this need inside of us, His justice demands Him to create an external outlet to fulfill that need. Think about it for a moment, right? If God made us hungry and no food, we question God's wisdom. God made us thirsty, nothing to drink in the external world, we would question His justice. If God made us desire companionship and not give us a proper institution for that companionship, we of course would question His wisdom and His justice, God forbid. That God, you gave me this burning desire to be with somebody and to live my life with somebody, and yet there's no institution out there. So there has to be an external outlet to fulfill an internal need. Now, for companionship, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made marriage a very, very beautiful institution. In Surah Rum, if you can follow along with me, Surah Rum is the 30th chapter of the Quran, verses 20 all the way down to 26. Okay, I find this point to be incredible. I make this point whenever I talk about marriages in seminars, workshops, and in our speeches. And here as well, I want to mention it very quickly and then move on to other discussions. In these 6 verses of Surah Rum, from 20 to 26, if you notice, to those who are there right now following along with me, 20 to 26, they all start in the exact same way in the Arabic. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ. And from His signs, and from His signs, and from His, naturally, verses about God's signs in this universe. Now, if you look at some of the ones that are listed, some are very obvious. Others are not so obvious. For example, he starts off by talking about خَلَقْنَا مِن تَرَابٍ. Sorry, خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن تَرَابٍ. We have created you from dirt. Okay? One of our signs is that we created you from dirt. Okay? Beautiful. Right? Another one talks about خَلْقُ السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Right? وَاخْتِلَافُ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَنْوَامِكُم. We've created, one of the signs that we of ours is, or Allah's sign is the creation of the heavens and the earth. And the various languages and colors that exist in this universe. Okay? I don't mean colors in terms of like the flowers and the rainbow in the sky. No, colors of each other as well. Right? Tongues and cultures and accents and dialects of each other. All of that we have used to divide each other and oppress each other on and judge each other on. Allah says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ. It's one of my signs. Later on, He talks about the idea that the lightning that scares you, from my signs. The sleep at night, from my signs. And sandwiched in between there somewhere, these are massive discussions, right? The creation of the human being, massive discussion. The heavens and the earth, massive discussion. The lightning and the thunder, discussion. And somewhere in between there, very beautifully, He says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. And also from His side is that He created for you and from you spouses. SubhanAllah. I mean, Allah saying the same Allah that gave you your creation in dirt, and the same Allah that brought the heavens and the earth to life is the same Allah that brought you your spouse. Isn't that beautiful? And if we get nothing from this very famous verse that we find in a lot of wedding cards, we get the fact that this institution of marriage is very, very sacred and noble in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To be referred to as a sign of Allah is incredible. And you look at even in the fiqhi aspect of it, there is this nobility in overall marriage. If a Hindu couple that were married when they were Hindu decide to convert to Islam as a husband and a wife, nowhere in our fiqh is there anywhere that once they convert into Islam, now a nikah has to be done again in the Islamic way. No, Islam now recognizes that marriage, even though they were done, they had their ceremony when they were Hindu. That's how much Islam recognizes the sanctity of the institution of marriage. So this is not just something that, okay, yeah, mom, I want to marry her. Okay. No, there has to be some planning involved here. There has to be a little bit of preparation involved here. There has to be some thought pattern involved here, right? It can't be just blue eyes and blonde hair and how many figures does he make. It can't be that. Allah's calling this one of his signs. So now let's talk a little bit about, let's first of all talk about when to get married. And then, of course, who to get married to. I want to present to you a couple of traditions and one verse from the Quran that is usually read inside the khutbah before the nikah of a lot of the ulama. Because the idea is that we see things that should not be given a tangible and a liquid asset value. We see that we see that we others see those things as dollar signs. What I mean by that is this. If you ask a young couple nowadays, are you guys planning to have a child? Like, yeah, we don't know. It's really expensive to have a kid nowadays. Or it takes a toll on the body, for example. And so right away when you put a dollar sign on the child's forehead, you're not quite understanding the beauty of the child. The same idea is that when you put a dollar value on a marriage, or you put a dollar value on yourself as a potential, spouse or potential wife or husband, then you haven't truly understand the sanctity of this being God's sign. So a lot of my youth out there right now listening to me, they're in that time in their life where they should be looking to get married, discussions about marriage, possibly already married, but a lot of factors are there, and the one that I see that's primary is the fact that I can't afford a wedding. I don't have enough saved, for example, because we think that the amount that we want saved is, I need a furnished house, I need a car, I need to make this amount of money, and I'll get to that in a moment. And the problem lies in the fact that as parents sometimes we're not willing to see my daughter or my son kind of go through the struggles in life with their potential spouse, right? We want her, especially our daughters, to go from a set home into another set home, or a X amount or X size of a house to another X size of a house, a fully furnished house to another fully furnished house, right? And so all these conditions are set. Meanwhile, this young guy, he knows that in this economy especially, he won't get to that furnished flat or furnished apartment, studio apartment, especially in the US now, although I've heard Texas is quite cheap, but still, until maybe his late 20s. Now he's gone through these prime years of his life now, where shaitan is attacking him almost on an hourly basis, and he could have saved himself from a lot of sin had all these conditions that are non-Islamic, by the way, drop. Okay? Come to Surah Nur. Beautiful, 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 beautiful verse. Surah Nur, verse number 24. Okay? Sorry, actually, Surah Nur, verse number 32. Surah Nur is the 24th chapter of the Quran. Verse number 32. Again, this is a verse that is read inside the khutbah, usually before the nikah. There is a certain khutbah that is recommended by, I believe, our 10th Imam, that a lot of us recite during the nikah, and this verse is also included in that. It talks about marriage, who to marry, and what to expect when you get married. It starts off by saying, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa ankihul ayama minkum. Marry the single ones amongst you. Okay? وَصَالِحِينَ مِنْ عِبَادِكُمْ وَإِمَائِكُمْ. Right? And those who are fit among you, those who are, individuals who are fit among your male slaves and your female ones. Okay? Now, if إِن يَكُونُوا فُقَرَاءَ, very, very careful. This is exactly what I was talking about. if they are somebody who is a faqir, and faqir here doesn't mean a beggar, God forbid, but somebody, let's say, for example, who may not be doing so well. Maybe they haven't established their career yet. Maybe they're not making as much money that's there for them to afford living, let's say, for example, a married life. إِن يَكُونُوا فُقَرَاءَ. Okay? If that happens, then now comes the promise of Allah. Look at what He says. He says, if that's the case, that they are faqir, يُغْنِيهُمُ اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ. Allah will make them, through this marriage now, through this nikah now, the very first verb in the opening of the verse, Allah says, we'll make you ghani, we'll make you needless from what? Min fadlihi, from His grace. From His grace. You have to have a little bit of confidence in God to be able to say, look, maybe, I'm not established yet in my career. Now, I'll get in a moment that I'm not asking you to give your daughter to somebody who is, who has no prospects, no education, doesn't have the work ethic. No, I'll get to that in a moment. But there are people sometimes who really want to be established in my career. I'm not married yet. I have a lot more things to do before I bring a wife into the picture or a spouse into the picture. Now, hold on now. You could do all those things with your spouse there. Think about the bigger picture. You're denying the need for companionship inside of you, and you're inviting sin upon sin in your early 20s, late teens, mid-20s. Allah here says, إِن يَكُونُوا فُقَرَاءَ يُغْنِيهُمُ اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ. Right? If you are somebody who is a faqir and a beggar, Allah will make you ghani from His grace. Wallahu wasi'un alim. He is, He's wasi', He's ample giving. There's nothing He can't do. And He's knowing, He knows, He's alim. He knows your state. He knows your state. So if any of you out there at an age now where you have to get married, but you think to yourself, you know what, I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet. Now, being there yet is very subjective. There's no absolute number, let's say, that I have to make this amount of money a year in order for me not to bring a spouse in, okay? Now, there are, of course, our hadiths from our 60 man that talk about the fact that, there has to be some financial stability there. What I mean by that is that I don't mean actual zeros. I mean that this individual, now let's say, for example, in our culture, in our predominantly South Asian culture, India, Pakistan, it is the boy that sends the proposal towards the girl. And that doesn't have to happen. As we know historically, the Prophet of Allah did not send the proposal to Khadija. Actually, he was sent the proposal by her. But nonetheless, I don't want to come and break cultural norms, otherwise you're going to hang me. But it's okay if, for example, like sometimes I find that the girl and her family, they both agree that this family would be really good. Like the boy in that family would be a good prospect. And now somehow they're trying to find a way to get news to that family anonymously to talk about the daughter in this family, meaning us. And you don't have to do that. I get it. It's like, it's like blasphemy, right? But let's change the norm slowly, bit by bit, right? It's okay if the girl's side picks up the phone and says, look, your boy Falan, for example, what are his thoughts about marriage right now? But usually, when the boy sends a proposal, it's okay to ask, education, what's he doing? What are the plans right now, right? I've seen parents give their girls to boys that are not even employed yet. But you know what? He's got a great mind, a great work ethic. He has a degree. It's a matter of time now. He has prospects, and they have reliance on God. And then I see the other side where they will not give their daughter to this boy unless he goes out, gets his master's, for example, gets a job in a certain firm or a certain top 5 firm, and then come back and prove to us that you've gotten this degree. So show us the MBA, and then show us the offer letter, and then we'll give you our daughter. And they've gone now 2-3 years later, done their master's, grabbed the job, came back, and they got married. Now, I don't know who for who what works. I have no idea. All I'm saying is that I'm not being naive to say, look, this guy's not educated, Maulana. He has a high school diploma at best. He doesn't have a work ethic. He plays video games all day, right? There's no prospects. There's no skill set. There's no experience. Why should I mean, is this what the verse is talking about? No, of course not. Of course not. Right? The idea of in yakunu fuqara is the idea that, they're not quite there yet in terms of being an established individual in this world, but that should not deny him the right to be married. we have to have a little bit of confidence in God when he says that, look, when a marriage happens, risk is there. Risk is there. Okay? That's point number one. Which brings me, and it's a good segue to the idea of younger marriages. Okay? Now, back in my time, and I sound so old saying that, but that's a reality. Back in my time, the ideal kind of on average age was mid-20s, right? Nowadays, I don't know what's happening in Dallas, but at least in Toronto, there's a lot of young marriages, late teens, early 20s, right? 2021, for example. I read a nikah before Muharram started for a couple that were 20 and 21, respectively. And a number of you have asked me to touch on this. Now, obviously in Islam, the recommendation is to get them married as early as possible. Let me read to you one hadith, right? And I'm not usually one to read off of a screen, but in this this pandemic world, I'm going to go ahead and take advantage of this idea. The Prophet says in Bahar now, okay, and I have the source, everyone wants it, get your children married. And the way that they describe children is that, I don't mean children, obviously. I mean young adults, right? Get your youth married. It might be a poor translation. Because thereby, through the marriage, Allah will render their tempers to be good, adds to their sustenance, and increases their sense of honor. So three things happen. When you marry young, and when I say young, again, it's subjective, right? Late teens, early 20s, maybe, right? When you get married young, three things happen, he says. Your akhlaq changes. Number two is there's an increase in your risk. And number three, you become honorable. Honorable. Right? Your relationship with the opposite gender is now halal. Right? And you've chosen now not to go down the path of sin. You've chosen now to settle down. It is a big risk, and it's heavy for a 19, 20-year-old to be married. Okay? But I've seen it happen. Now, provided now, let me throw this in there, provided now both families of these two that are getting married so young completely understand that a lot of times I've seen it that both of them are still in school, which means that they don't have the money to afford their own place, which means that one of the two are going to have to be okay with living with their in-laws. Okay. Now this is not very common in the non-Desi world with Iranians and Arabs, but it's very common inside the South Asian world. In fact, sometimes expected. Right? And usually that adjustment happens for the girl. She leaves the house and she comes into the boy's house. Okay. Now, if they are both young at 19, 20, just freshly graduated, if they're doing their post-grad, the master's, whatever the case may be, and they're still in school, I don't know why I did the air quotes, but they're still in school, I have no idea why I did the air quotes, but they're still studying, then obviously there's going to have to be a little bit of financial support from the parents. And the idea is that one of the spouses have to be okay with living with the in-laws. And you have to mentally train yourself that this could be a couple of years, that I'll be with my mother-in-law and my father-in-law, and maybe my brother-in-law who have to wear hijab around him inside the house, whatever the case may be. Right? All those things have to kind of go in along with the idea of the honeymoon and the running through the fields and all those things are great. Those are very strong emotions. But the reality is that the moment that the honeymoon phase is over, then reality sinks in, and now you're with this guy who's going to school, and you're going to school. You may barely see him all day, right? You may be home for hours without him inside of his parents' home. On top of that, the idea of spending and going on vacation and eating out and all these things have to be restricted because you're on a very restricted budget. All of that happens when you marry young. That's a reality I just want to throw out there. I've seen individuals now, after 6 months, 10 months of living with the in-laws, they go, forget it, I'm sorry. So one has to drop out of school, open up his own business, work 9 to 5, work 2 jobs, let's say, for example, but they end up, renting out some apartment, let's say, for example. They're apart, but one of them has to now drop out of school, right? So we have to be able to understand that, yes, while there is this recommendation to marry young, it comes with some challenges, which of course, those challenges are nothing compared to us, outlasting shaitan, or for us fighting that sin, for example, right? We don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we understand in the grand scheme of things, this couple of years of sacrifice of not going on vacations, for example, and not eating out every single day, and not having this and not buying, and sometimes not even having your own car, right? You have to borrow, let's say, whoever's car is in the driveway. That is secondary. Primary is that you've saved yourself from a lot of sin. It's very commendable. I would always recommend to be married young. I would, provided that both families even understand this idea. Right? Sometimes, the girl's okay with it, but the girl's parents are not. So they'll swoop in and say, look, what is this? I mean, you guys have been with your parents for a year and a half now. Yeah, uncle, I just graduated. I'm looking for a job in my field. I'm trying to figure things out. It's an entry-level salary. It's not the best salary. Right now, the market is very, 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 very difficult for people who are buying. All these things are there, right? So you just got to be patient. But that patience now, of course, is the price that you pay for protecting your nafs and your soul from shaitan, ideally. So while there is and again, there's no recommended age. It's a case by case, right? Some of them show maturity 18, 19, others 25, 26. Right? So that's as well. The last point I want to make and then move towards Masaib is the idea of what should I be looking for in a spouse? Now, this has been discussed a number. I'm sure that Sheikh Mehdi has talked about this himself inside his various workshops. But as a reminder, because I'm still not seeing that list of priorities to match the list of Islam. I still have people coming to me asking me, look, Malana, you travel, I have a daughter, I have a son, this is what they're like, blah blah blah, can you please keep your eyes open? I said, sure, can you give me a rough idea of what you're looking for? And they'll start off with the physical, right? From the color of the eyes to the height to the weight to the Syed to all these things, and maybe down the list, maybe is hijab, maybe is beard, maybe is does he pray salat, for example? Maybe, right? And I want to share with you one hadith from Imam Jafri al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. He says that for the one who marries for taqwa, please follow very carefully. And those of you who have been married for a while now, you'll appreciate this hadith. The one who marries for piety, with piety, beauty and risk will come as well. But if you marry just for beauty and for risk, meaning for beauty and for money, right? As long as he looks good and makes good money, who cares if he prays namaz? Then after a while, the hadith says, the piety was never there, the money will fade away, the beauty will fade away as well. Look at the beautiful hadith, right? With piety, those two things that we want, beauty and money, also come as well. Okay? Now, let's explain that in a moment. When you have somebody who's pious, God-conscious, God-centric, God-fearing, lives a life that is resembling that inside of them, there's a certain level of outward piety, of course, then we have no reason to believe that Allah will not grant them risk. Right? If you have taqwa, وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. Surah Talaq says that for the one who has taqwa, Allah will create an outlet for them and grant them risk from sources that they never even accounted for. Right? But the condition is, وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ. You have to have taqwa and piety. So therein lies the money and the beauty. I've seen so many times when the person is beautiful for you on the inside, then that resembles beauty on the outside as well. When you see somebody as a nurani individual, as an enlightened individual, as a person of light, for example, you want to be around them, right? You desire their company. You want to be affected by them. And then they become, the most physically attractive person around for you. Now the opposite side is true as well. Let's come to the opposite side, right? I married this girl, let's say for example, for her looks and because she belongs to a very rich family, right? It happens all the time. But there's no sign of piety not in the family. They're not a very religious family at all. Not somebody that would really know much about Islam. But who cares? She's beautiful and she's rich. After a while, the lack of God consciousness inside of you and what comes about from a lack of God consciousness is a lack of good morals, essentially. I'm not saying that all irreligious people are ugly. I'm not saying that. But after a while, I've seen it happen that no matter how attractive you are on the inside, you become somebody who is unattractive for your spouse on the outside. And I've done counseling sessions where, I talk to the husband and he'll tell me flat out that, like, I married her for her looks. And even though she's maintained her looks, I don't want to see her face right now, Mona. I don't want to see her face. Right? Whereas in the beginning, all I wanted was to stare at her day and night and just, I'm in awe that that's my wife. Look at how beautiful she is. But that same person, a year, 2 years, 3 years later, is the ugliest person to me. Okay. Islam is screaming at us to live a life of the hidden, of the unseen. And this dunya is screaming at us to live the life of the apparent. And when we give life to the apparent and we deny the life of the unseen, the apparent becomes ugly really quickly. Because the beauty of the apparent is only fed by the beauty of the unseen. Right? So when you are searching, and I humbly ask my parents out there as well, blue eyes and green eyes and, a certain skin tone, a certain color, a certain complexion, all these things is just flat out wrong. It's elitism, it's shadism, right? I mean, there are some people that, the person now and their families arrive at the door and they look at them and say, no, that girl's not for me, not for my son. She hasn't opened her mouth. She hasn't opened her mouth. You haven't even greeted her yet. And from the driveway, as she's walking up to your front door, you're like, no, not her. Why? She's a shade darker than I would like. Then my grandkids become a little bit dark. And we're all people who are, mashallah, we're a shade lighter than that. Happens all the time, happens too many times, I'm sorry. And that's not what the deen talks about. Right? It's a recipe for disaster. There has to be something to base yourself on. The 40, 50, 60 years down the road, when all the beauty that you see right now fades, I'm sorry. Then is there a beauty on the inside that keeps you wanting to be around? And ask yourself that question. 20, 30 years from now, will I want to be with this person? Now, a lot of you will ask me, how do I figure that out with one visit and one cup of tea? How do I do that? In conversations, there are ways that we can find that out. Okay? There are ways that we can find it out. Islam gives you the leeway to converse with your potential spouse, albeit in a very civilized way, over the phone, over text, whatever. Even when you meet, you're allowed to sit in a supervised private area. Now, what that means is, for example, if the family comes to the house, for example, for a proposal, and it should be, it's a good idea as parents that you give the two potential spouses some time alone, but it can't be behind a closed door. They're still non-mahram to each other. So what usually I've seen is that they go out in the backyard and you pull the drapes and you keep the backyard door open, right? So they have their privacy outside, but they're not completely hidden from view. Now, in those conversations, if you're smart, and if anybody out there right now is in that process where you are talking to potential spouses, I get these questions all the time that, what do I talk about? How do I find out in those 3, 4, 5, 8, 9 conversations whether or not this guy is pious, this guy is whatever? And I said, look, it's a matter of you broaching certain topics, touching on certain topics. For example, I'm a big family guy. I have a huge family here in Toronto, and we're all, mashallah, a very tight-knit family. So I talk about my family with her. And I see the response. If she equally has as many stories with me as I do, I know right away that she's a family-oriented girl. Great sign. I talk about my heavy commitment in my community. I love my community. Since I was a child, I belong to the same community, right? And now that community I'm serving today. I talk about programs, I talk about growing up, I talk about this uncle and that auntie, not in a gossip way, but people who have helped me. And I talk about the youth development, the youth groups, blah, blah. And then in turn, I kind of see what her reaction is. If she's looking up and down, or let's say not interested, or she wants to change the subject, she's not a community person. Now, mind you, these are not absolutes, right? Small things here and there. Right? You can kind of find out a certain level. You can at least work with something. Remember, Islam says, I'll give you the skeleton. Right? The meats and the potatoes and everything else in between has to be worked on after marriage. Sometimes we want to get everything out before marriage and then assume that after marriage it's going to be a smooth ride. No, absolutely not. The struggle actually begins after marriage. That's when you really have to harmonize and gel, sacrifice, compromise, right? Selflessness, all those things are there. Okay, so these are all tips and tools that we can use. So in summary tonight, we want to make sure that, number one, we understand the beauty of marriage, the need for marriage. Number two, we also want to understand that, yes, early marriages are great, and they really are great. I've seen them save so many lives, but you have to understand the reality on the ground 6 months into your early marriage with your potential spouse. Okay? And then the last point I made was about selection of spouse and why taqwa and piety is so important. I'll share with you one hadith and then masaib, inshallah. The sixth Imam says that if you marry somebody for piety, they'll stay with you on the level of piety, and if you have to part, they will leave you on the basis of piety. I've seen families, I'm sure all of you have at City of Knowledge, I'm sure you have. You've seen families, pious family, great family, well-respected family in the community, and the moment that God forbid, one of their kids now gets through a divorce, the ugly side of them comes out. The backbiting, the gossip, the slander, going from door to door, person to person, right? Making sure they get their version of the divorce out before anyone else gets their version out, right? And meanwhile, making up lies, for example, destroying the image of a girl or a guy, making sure that nobody in the community would ever give their child to this person. He's a monster, he's this, he's that, she's this, she's that, everything. What happened to the piety all of a sudden, right? So a true piety not only keeps you and you're in the marriage on the basis of God consciousness, but also when they leave, God forbid, and they separate maintaining your izzat and respect, because that's what God would want. God would want. And that's why when you look at the spouse of Imam Hussein Rabab on the plains of Karbala and his journey of Sham and Kufa, she was so supportive. She was right there beside her husband. When Muslim ibn Aqil was shaheed and thrown off the palace of Ibn Ziyad, and you hear this in his Masaib every year on the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, on the day of Arafah, when we commemorate his shahadat. There's one moment where Muslim now turns towards Mecca and says, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Imam Hussein had already left Medina and Mecca on his way towards Kufa. The books say he stopped, and in the heart of his heart he heard the salam of Muslim. He stopped and he turns towards Kufa, says, Wa alaykum salam wa rahmatullah. Bibi Zainab says, Bhaiya, who are you replying to? He says, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Muslim has been shaheed. They begin to grieve. And then Imam Hussein asks for the daughter of Muslim to be brought to him. He picks her up and he hugs her. And he takes his hand and he puts his hand over her head. And he says that from now on I'll be your father. From now on, you're not alone. I'll take after you. I'll I'll look after you. I'll take care of you. I'll do everything. You won't be alone. I won't even let you, for a moment now feel that you've lost your father. And this loving, caring Imam now is being shown to the daughter of Muslim ibn Aqil. And Mawla, I would say this to you, that you have such compassion and such love for the daughter of Muslim. But my only dua is that when you are sitting there and you are stroking the head of this small little child, and you are telling her over and over again that I am your father, I will protect you, I will look after you, I pray that your own sakina is nowhere near you. I pray that your own sakina is not watching this, because when she's yatim and shame ghariba, she'll expect someone to come just like you came to the daughter of Muslim and hug her and kiss her and tell her that I will be your father from now on, I'll look after you from now on. But the reality is that while Muslim's daughter got your hugs and your kisses, your own daughter Sakina, where somebody should have came and hugged her and kissed her, slapped her across her face. When somebody should have gave her tasalli and gave her condolences, they came and they ripped her earrings out of her ear. When someone should have came and stroked her head and said that you are not alone in this world, they burnt the kurta and the shirt that she was wearing. The same Sakina that went screaming into the Maidan of Karbala when the tents were on fire. Bibi Zainab says, I couldn't find Sakina. I couldn't locate Sakina. This was Hussein who told Zainab, Zainab, that's my amanat. Look after my Sakina. And it was only when Imam Hussein says, Zainab, lower your voice. She's just fallen asleep on my chest. سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to accept this qaleel ibadat, inshaAllah. We ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to give us that tawfiq, inshaAllah, to start off our lives with the right choice in our spouses, to encourage our youth to get married young, inshaAllah, to be individuals who are financially independent, who are building themselves towards being a proper spouse for others. We ask you, Allah, to weaken the hands of the enemies of humanity, to strengthen the mustaza'afin all of the world. And finally, Allah, we ask one dua on this Friday, that you make us worthy of the arrival of the Imam, inshaAllah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
आबिद उठा रहे हैं अपनी बहन का लाशा 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 गोदी है जिसकी सूनी उजड़ा सुहाग जिसका करबल में सो रहा हो जिस माँ का झूले वाला उस माँ के दिल को कैसे देगा कोई दिलासा आबिद उठा रहे हैं अपनी बहन का लाशा आबिद उठा रहे हैं अपनी बहन का लाशा अब्बास की भतीजी पहम तमाचे खाके आई थी करबला से जुल्मो सितम उठा के खामोश हो गई क्यों रूदाद हम सुना के आबिद उठा रहे हैं अपनी बहन का लाशा आबिद उठा रहे हैं अपनी
बहन का लाशा।
रुखसार नीलगू है, कुर्ता फटा हुआ है, कानों से खून है जारी, जख्मों का सिलसिला है। हर नाज उठाने वाला करबल में सो रहा है।
आबिद उठा रहे हैं अपनी बहन का लाशा।
आबिद उठा रहे हैं
अपनी बहन का लाशा।
एक आखिरी वसीयत भाई से उसने की थी, लेकिन वसीयत उसकी पूरी न होने पाई। जिंदान में रशीद अब तुरबात बनेगी उसकी।
आबिद उठा रहे हैं अपनी बहन का लाशा।